Chapter 3.
It's been 2 hours since the red sector went dark. Paula's locked herself in her room, and I haven't seen Jack since then. The house isn't all that big. I should have at least heard his voice by now. But it's been completely silent. Glenn and Christine have stopped pounding on the doors and windows. Now they're both standing there in the pouring rain, watching me. Water had been leaking into the house for a few hours. If this kept up, the first floor would be flooded in no time. I tried calling out to Jack and Paula, but neither of them responded. Going from room to room, I looked for Jack occasionally yelling out his name, and when I couldn't find him, I went to Paula's door and knocked. "Hey Paula, have you seen Jack?" She didn't answer. I knocked a few more times, then finally tried the knob. Slowly, opening the door, calling her name, I looked inside. The room was empty. All of her stuff was gone. It was like she'd never been there. Staggering back away from the door, I glanced down the hall and noticed the mirror wasn't broken anymore. What the fuck? Before I could even finish uttering to myself, there was a loud bang from downstairs, and lights started flashing. Alarms sounded, and in the chaos, a raspy voice screamed out, "Calvin!" Footsteps thundered up the stairs, and in seconds, Glenn was standing at the end of the hall. Screaming my name, he charged, slamming into me, knocking me off my feet. For a scrawny guy, Glenn was strong as shit. It was taking a lot of effort to get him off of me. The mushrooms that were growing out of his skin began bursting, sending clouds of yellow spores floating in the air. I couldn't fight him off and hold my breath at the same time, so I wound up inhaling a cloud of them, instantly feeling lightheaded. Planting my feet against the ground, I managed to turn my hip and roll onto him, struggling to keep control of his hands. Kicking and squirming, he managed to slip my grip and push me off using his feet, in a way that worked in my favor because now I was standing. But instead of scrambling up to his feet, he began moving rapidly on all fours. His bones began popping and shifting, while he continued to scream my name and crawl towards me. There was no time to think. I kicked him as hard as I could, causing another cloud of spores to explode into the air. Holding my breath, I rushed past him, leaping down the stairs. When I hit the bottom, I tumbled, landing close to the front door. Leaving the house meant losing the money, but closing the door would stop the alarms. Slamming the door shut, I raced to the kitchen just as Glenn started scrambling down the stairs. It only took a second to grab the hammer off the counter and a knife out of the sink, which was fortunate because Glenn came rushing in just as I turned to face the door. "Calvin!" he screamed, launching himself into the air. Out of reflex, I swung the hammer and connected with a heavy thud. Glenn let out another scream, tumbling to the ground, and I lost it. I attacked him like a wild man, slashing him with the blade and smashing him with the hammer, until I was a blood-covered mess, and he was a shredded mass of gore and bone. You know, in the movies at times like these, there's almost always a primal rage moment. Well, I didn't have one. Instead, I puked my guts out and sat there trying to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. While I was sitting in the kitchen, the sound of someone splashing through water nearly scared me to death. Jolting up from my seat, grabbing the hammer, I spun around to see Christine standing in the doorway. Remember when I told you I'm a huge believer in instinct? Well, I had a flashback of Jack throwing that stone, and my instinct said to throw the hammer. I did. I watched it tumble through the air and crack her in the face. She dropped to the floor. For a split second, I was as proud as a person could be. Then she sprung right back up to her feet. Shit. She ran and jumped on the island in the center of the kitchen, then kicked me in the face. There was a bright flash of light, and a crunch as I staggered back with blood gushing from my nose. Before I could even recover, she dove onto me, and we both crashed to the floor. I tried to get my hands up to block my face, but I wasn't fast enough. She head-butted me in the mouth, knocking out one of my teeth and splitting my lip, then followed up by elbowing me in the neck, before hopping up and kicking me so hard I slid across the floor. When I tried to get up, she kicked me in the chest, knocking me flat on my ass, then screamed and stomped on my left ankle. From where I was on the floor, I could see the cabinet pots and pans were in. With her closing in on me, I grabbed a cast iron skillet and swung it as hard as I could. There was a loud metallic clank and the wet crack of bone. It connected with the point of her elbow as she was reaching for me and shattered the bone, forcing it to splinter out through the bend of her arm. She screamed so loud I thought my ears would bleed, but it gave me a chance to get onto my feet. Raising the skillet above my head, I brought it down on her skull as hard as I could. She dropped, still screaming at the top of her lungs, and went into a wild spastic seizure. Christine flopped around, smearing blood everywhere, as her scream slowly wound down to a gurgling gasp for oxygen. Her wild flailing became a slow, rhythmic, convulsing tick, before finally going still. I hadn't thought about the mushrooms on her skin until that moment, and it was too late. A massive cloud of yellowish spores flooded the room. Before I could stop myself, I was breathing it in. Covering my mouth and nose with my hands, I rushed out of the kitchen to the hall. I took maybe 3 steps before everything went black. I had the weirdest dream about Jack and Paula walking around looking for me. They would walk right past me, like I wasn't even there. The dream just kept repeating until I woke up still lying in the hallway. Getting up from the floor, I double-checked the kitchen to be sure I wasn't just imagining what went down. The bodies were still there. My eyes were nearly swollen shut, and it was hard to breathe through my nose. I was pretty sure it was broken. My throat hurt, and the middle of my chest felt like hamburger meat. Staggering through the hall, I started to notice the water was up to the first step of the stairs. I was ankle deep in it. There was a loud pop from the front room as one of the sockets got wet and a lamp blew out. I had to get out of the water. Moving as fast as I could, I got upstairs. I didn't and don't know how I managed to not get electrocuted, and I did not care. I was still alive, and one day closer to my prize. I sat up all night, watching the water rise. I kept expecting the lights to go out, but they never did. There were a couple of times I could have sworn I heard Paula calling my name, but she never appeared. I was starting to think, made her and Jack up. Maybe they were in my head, and this place was getting to me after all. After all, I hadn't been on my medication in a long time. I rolled through 1,000,001 possibilities in my mind until I eventually fell asleep, right there on the stairs. When I woke up, the first floor was underwater. There were only 5 or 6 steps left before it would be on the second floor. Wincing a little, I got up and went to my room. The instant I laid on my bed, there was a knock at the door, and Jack called out,
"Hey, Greenie, you in there?"
Before I could respond, he opened the door and turned on the light.
There you are. Jesus, Greenie, what the hell happened to you? Now where's Paula? You wouldn't believe how much shit I've been through looking for you two.
He stood there looking at me as if he was waiting for an answer. Shaking his head and laughing, he turned to walk out.
Come on, Greenie, get your shit together and meet me downstairs. We gotta find Paula.
Jack walked down the hall whistling that same weird little tune, and I listened to him clumping down the stairs. Confused and a little bit curious, I rolled out of bed and stepped out into the hall. It was still raining outside, but the water was gone. Jack yelled up to me.
Hey, I'm making a drink. You want one?
I didn't respond. Slowly, I made my way downstairs. There wasn't even a drop of water in the house. Looking to my right, I glanced out the window to see Glenn was gone. Hey, Jack, where did Glenn go? Turning to take a look, he scratched his head and chuckled.
Hell, I don't know. Stopped paying attention to that asshole a long time ago. I'm just glad their stupid-ass kid wasn't with them.
Nodding my head, I went to the kitchen to get a look. When I opened the door, the skillet was on the floor, but there were no bodies. The hammer was sitting on the counter, and the knife was still in the sink. If it weren't for that one thing, I would have been fine, but there it was, sitting there on the floor like some sort of twisted reminder of what happened. I must have been standing there for a minute or two before I noticed the mystery door was back in one piece and still nailed shut. What the? I was cut off by the muffled sound of someone calling for help. I yelled to Jack, "Hey Jack, get in here!" A second or two later, he poked his head through the door.
You rang?
Shushing him, I pointed to my ears. "Can you hear that?" He smiled and acted like he was listening. Then we both heard it.
Hey, somebody get me out of here.
The voice was low and it was hard to make out, but the longer we listened, we figured out where it was coming from. The voice was coming from behind the mystery door. Every bone in my body was screaming, "Don't do it!" But the closer I got, the more I knew for a fact that it was Paula's voice. Jack and I stood there for a second looking at the door. The last time something came through it was traumatizing. The thought of possibly seeing one of those things again didn't sit well with me. But Jack is Jack, the king of no fucks given. He grabbed the hammer without another thought and started prying out the nails.
Whoa, hold up a second. How do we know that that's really her in there?
Jack stopped prying out the nails and looked at me.
Who else would it be?
I was actually a little shocked by his response. I had to gather myself and shake it off.
What? There's no way you don't remember what came out of there last time.
What if it's one of them pretending to be her? Scratching his head with the hammer, he smiled and yelled through the door.
Paula, is that you in there?
The voice responded with,
Of course it's me, you idiot. Now get me out of here.
He smiled and shrugged his shoulders.
Sounds like her to me.
Then he went back to prying out the nails. I backed away and watched from the doorway. If one of those things came rushing out, I wasn't going to be sticking around. When he finally got the door open, Paula stepped out and kicked him in the balls.
Oh, that's for locking me in there, you backwoods cousin fucker.
She turned and gave me an angry look.
And you, where the hell have you been? If you wouldn't have pulled the vanishing act, maybe you could have stopped Elmer Fudd over there from locking me in the basement.
Pushing past me, she stormed out. Jack chuckled from the floor, still wheezing a little.
She wasn't really my cousin,
he yelled out, getting off the floor.
At least I don't think she was. Hey, Greenie, is your uncle's wife's daughter your cousin?
Shaking my head, I turned and walked away. When I made it to the main room, I turned on the television and checked the Red Sector's feed. First there was nothing, but after a few seconds the screen came to life. There was a teenage girl slowly making her way through the house. I couldn't remember which one of the Hill's daughters she was, but I wasn't going to bother Paula to find out. The girl moved along, going from room to room, pushing open doors, till she made it to the room Fred, or should I say, what was left of Fred, was in. When she pushed it open, the camera switched to inside the room, and I nearly panicked. The eggs were hatching, releasing tiny slimy versions of those things. I'm pretty tired of calling them ape frogmen things or whatever, so from now on I'll just refer to them as Mogs. So, if you hear me say that, you'll know what I'm talking about, and if you don't, go back and listen to the first part of this, and you'll understand. Anyway, the mini-Mogs were on her the second she opened the door. They dog-piled her, pinning her to the floor, but not for long. The girl's father came rushing into the frame, swatting the little bastards with what looked like a baseball bat. After a few seconds, he helped her off the floor, and they ran off screen. The camera started switching between rooms for a few seconds, then the feed stopped again. The thought of a horde of tiny Mogs made my stomach hurt. Turning off the television, I started towards the stairs when Jack stopped me.
Greenie, you're not gonna believe the shitstorm I went through while you were gone. Where did you go anyway?
When I was done, he smiled and scratched at his beard before taking a long sip from his drink.
I hate to be that guy, but I think I got you beat. Check this out. After the lights went out at the Red House, I went to the bathroom. When I came back, you and Paula were gone. I didn't think anything of it, because you guys always leave. Which, by the way, is completely messed up. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Anyhow, I was sitting on the couch watching a movie when I saw the floor start moving. I tried to ignore it at first. Then I got up to go to the kitchen and the whole room melted away. Then I was back on that island I told you about. He paused to take another sip from his drink, then pulled out a joint from his pocket and lit up. I almost cried. I'd been dying for some weed and he had it the whole time? Where'd you get that? Is there more? I asked. Exhaling a healthy cloud and passing it to me, he coughed a little and shook his head. If either of you would have taken a second to hang out with me, you would have known it was my item. No matter how many times I smoked this joint, the second I put it out, it becomes a whole new joint. I've had this baby since my first day here. It's the same as your alcohol. No matter how much you drink it, it just keeps coming back.
I hadn't noticed how much Jack actually knew about what was going on until that moment. Wait, hold up. How do you know all of this? How long have you been here? Looking up at the ceiling, he counted to 5 using his fingers, then looked at me and said,
3 months.
More than a little confused, I took another hit and passed it back. If you've been here for 3 months, then why'd you count to 5? Jack laughed and took a big hit. Talking and blowing smoke at the same time, he chuckled.
Because you're the 5th person to ask me the same question, and I already know what you're going to say. The next question is almost always, what the hell's going on here? My short answer to that is, I don't know. Before you go firing off questions about the houses, I don't know that either. From what I can tell, they look the same on the outside, but shit's different on the inside. My guess it's some sort of messed up metaphor to teach us a lesson.
Taking a hit, I had to admit, Jack was a lot deeper than I gave him credit for. What he said was probably a lot closer to the truth than any of us knew. But before I could say anything about it, Paula's voice called out from the stairs.
Please tell me there's more weed.
Jack and I burst out laughing as she joined us on the couch.
No, seriously, pass that shit.
Passing it, I watched the expression on her face turn disappointed when she saw there was just a hit or two left. Jack could barely keep himself from giggling when he told her to put it out and watch the magic. The second she put it out, a fresh one materialized at her fingertips. We both nearly died laughing. Looking at the two of us having a great time, she couldn't help but get swept up in the good vibe we had going. Before long, she joined in. We smoked and drank all night, swapping stories about what happened. I don't think Jack ever got to finish telling his story. In any case, it didn't really matter. Nothing else happened that night, and by the end of it, everyone went to bed happy. When I woke up the next morning, the rain had finally stopped. The second I opened my eyes, I knew something was off. I wasn't in my room. Sitting up in bed, I realized I was in Paula's bed, but she wasn't there. Trying to shake that fuzzy hungover feeling out of my brain, I rubbed my eyes, then threw the covers off me. I was still fully dressed, so I was pretty sure nothing happened. Getting out of bed, I heard Paula yell.
Oh, what the fuck?
I tumbled out of bed and staggered out to the hallway in time to see Jack coming up the stairs. The door to my room flew open, and Paula came storming out with an angry expression on her face. She looked at me, then pointed back to my room.
How did I get in there, and why do you have that creepy-ass doll standing in the corner of your room?
Looking at the two of us, Jack shook his head. Neither of you remember? Well, allow me to shed a little light on last night's escapades. You two were going at it like a couple of horned-up teenagers. Then you decided to go to bed. I'm not sure what happened after that, but at one point there was some running back and forth between rooms, then it got quiet. Paula stormed off, leaving Jack and I standing in the hall. I turned to him and asked, "Did that really happen?" He smiled and turned to go downstairs. Nope. I just love messing with you two. I drug both of your sorry asses up here after you passed out and put you in each other's rooms to screw with your heads. I didn't see any doll in your room, though. When he was gone, it hit me. There was no doll in my room. Standing in the hall, staring at my room's door, I was overcome with a sudden urge to vomit. A set of wrinkled, discolored fingers slowly gripped the door and began pulling it further open. The sound of those flesh-eating fairies filled the air with a buzzing sound, and in the blink of an eye, the hall was filled with hundreds of them pouring out of my room. I heard Paula's door open behind me. She screamed, "Get in here, quick!" I turned slightly, tripping on the carpet, and bolted towards the sound of her voice. I could hear Jack downstairs yelling, just before something smashed against the wall. Racing into Paula's room, I slammed the door shut behind me. A few made it in and were attacking us both. One swooped in, landing on my back, taking a bite from my shoulder on contact. To put it into perspective, these things are a little bigger than a dragonfly, but their heads are about the size of a golf ball. Some of them are smaller than others. The sizes range from a little bigger than a fly to the size I mentioned previously. In either case, no matter what size they are, the bite hurts like hell. They also have stingers. When they sting you, you're injected with something. I don't know what it is, but it burns like fire spreading across your skin. Once it was pumping through my system, I became drowsy and was having trouble standing. I managed to kill 2 of them before I saw Paula smashing one with a book. Thinking that was a great idea, I staggered to her nightstand, grabbing the first one I touched. I could still hear Jack shouting and things breaking downstairs. While we both finished off killing all of the ones in the room with us, I tried to yell, but all that came out was a garbled stream of gibberish. The room started spinning, and I suddenly felt hot. Paula was standing in front of me asking if I was alright, but her words sounded slow and distorted. The room began shifting to my left. I didn't register in my brain that I was falling until I hit the ground. I wish I could have just blacked out. Instead, I slid across the floor till my feet touched the far wall, which is where the window was. That wall became the floor. I could look down and be staring out of the window at a world that was still in its normal position. Making matters even worse, everything in the room, including Paula, was still standing exactly where I was when I fell. She turned to me as if this was all completely normal and started to smile. There was a high-pitched whining sound that started to slowly build, growing louder by the second, filling the room with a skull-splitting frequency that made it feel like my eyeballs would explode in their sockets. Paula's smile grew wider and wider, causing the corners of her mouth to split. Her teeth angled out and grew, Blood poured from her torn flesh, soaking her clothes and splattering on the floor, creating a stream that was spilling its way towards me. Her eyes glossed over, turning a foggy gray just before they sunk into her skull, creating a deep dark ring framing in their sockets. Her skin withered and sagged while bloody clumps of hair and scalp started raining from her head. But she never stopped smiling. The only door out of that room was now on the ceiling, and there wasn't much hope of getting to it. That high-pitched noise was driving me insane. I couldn't think past the pain. It was impossible to focus, and my body felt like it was made of mud. Paula stepped away from the bed and was now above me, heaping wet lumps of decaying flesh splattering on my head, neck, and shoulders make me want to vomit as she smiled that rotten-toothed smile. No matter how much I tried to move, my body would not react. I watched in frozen horror as Paula began slowly opening her mouth, releasing a tidal wave of streaming hot black fluid. The wave cascaded over me, shattering the glass beneath my feet, sending me tumbling out into what was now an empty void. The sensation of falling while somehow staying completely still sent a shockwave of confusion and fear surging through me. I wish I could say I did something bold and heroic, but the truth is I curled up into a ball and screamed my head off till everything suddenly stopped. Dead silence. A cool breeze and the sound of leaves scratching along the concrete made me open my eyes. I was outside. The sky was a hazy gray, and there was no sun, but somehow there was light. The smell of burning wood and sulfur filled my lungs, making me gasp and cough at first. After a few breaths, I was able to get control of it and got up off the ground. The houses were rubble. Some were completely leveled, stripped down to the foundation. The woods that surrounded everything were in a full-on blaze, sending flames high into the sky. Paralyzed by what I was seeing, I stood there for a long minute, taking it all in. I didn't get a chance to come to a conclusion before the sound of someone running up behind me snapped me out of it. Quickly turning, I saw Jack dressed in rags running towards me.
Greenie, what the hell are you doing standing there? Let's go!
Grabbing me by the arm, he forced me to run with him towards the end of the street. When we turned the corner, the world around us rippled and warped out of proportion, bursting like a bubble. I stumbled and got nauseous, finding myself standing in the hall a few feet from the stairs with Jack pulling me by the arm. Paula yelled from the bottom of the stairs,
"Hurry up, they're coming!"
Stumbling, trying to keep up, I rushed down behind Jack, meeting her at the bottom before sprinting into the kitchen, headed for the mystery door, and I stopped.
No, hell no, I'm not going in there!
They didn't give me a choice. They snatched me inside and started nailing the door shut. While they were finishing that up, I got a look around. Everything was fucking fantastic. A full bar. Taps included, a big screen with wall of movies and a pool table. As last stands go, I couldn't complain. When they were done, Paula looked at me, shaking her head.
What was that all about? First you fall face down on the floor and crawled into the window acting like the wall was the floor, then you just stayed there staring at me for a while, and then you threw up. I tried splashing some water on you to snap you out of it, but you screamed, balled up, and started crying.
I didn't have words to describe what I'd just been through. According to Paula, it was just a minute or two, but for me it felt like hours had passed. We scavenged the basement for weapons and came up with a bat, a golf club, and a can of spray paint with a lighter. By the way, the fairies were clawing at the door, and we didn't have a lot of time. There wasn't a plan. The only goal was to survive to the end of the event, which was still 4 days away, and at that point, none of us thought we would make it through the night. We stood there, silent, listening to the door being ripped away little by little. Pinpricks of light started beaming through tiny holes that were forming in the door. Within seconds, they came spilling in. Using my homemade blowtorch, I sent a ball of fire into the black cloud of fairies. A cluster of them burst into flames as Jack and Paula began clubbing as many of them as they could. I fired off another burst, taking another big section of the cloud down. We were winning. Wave after wave, we depleted the swarm down to just a few, and after a couple of tense moments, they were all gone. We were all torn up pretty bad. But it was done. The fairies were dead. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt like we had a chance. There had to be hundreds of those little fuckers splattered and scorched all over the basement. The few that were still buzzing on the ground got stomped out immediately. Exhausted and bloody, the three of us triumphantly made our way upstairs to find the house wrecked. They had destroyed everything in their path, but it didn't matter. We'd done it, and there was no taking that away from us. All three of us picked out a bottle, and without saying a word, went to our separate rooms. I know this is an odd spot to stop, but the hostage negotiator wants to talk to me. So, yeah, I'm stopping here for now. If I don't get shot, I'll be back.